We've just spent an hour with Mr. Mark Hix. He's a London restaurateur that spent the last 17 years managing and owning some of the top restaurants in London. And I was just surprised at kind of his laid-back style of dealing with some of these top places. Well, what did you think of him?
Yeah, well, as I said to you earlier, like I'd always understood that restaurants were very chaotic, heated, intense places, and especially successful ones, right? And he was just so zen and chilled out, and maybe that's the reason for his success. Maybe that's he can handle those environments.
Yeah, he's almost like a celebrity chef. He's got a cookbook out, but he doesn't seem to be that chef that we all expect on TV. He's not really selling anything. He's really more of a businessman.
Yeah, he kind of seems equally businessman and food artist. That's the best term I can think of. He's like a food artist.
Wow. And then we actually were lucky enough to go back to his restaurant Tramshed in Shoreditch and hang out in kind of his private bar dining area, and he just seems to kind of manage the place with like an intuitiveness. I don't know, but it looks like a lot of fun what he's doing there.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I don't think there's many people like him in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, no, I think he's very unique. So here's an hour with Mark Hix.
Enjoy.
This is London Real. I'm Brian Rose. This is Nick Gabriel. And joining us today is Mr. Mark Hix, who is a London restaurateur. He's been in the business for over 17 years and has either managed or owned such places as Le Caprice, Scott's, I just found out the Rivington, the Ivy, and most recently Hix Oyster and Chop House, also Hix Soho, and Tramshed, which is right here in Shoreditch, which is where I met Mark about 2 weeks ago, where he was busy working and having a glass of wine. Maybe it's the same thing.
You always need a glass of wine when you're working. helps the day.
You seem very busy, even though you're drinking a glass of wine.
Busy drinking the glass of wine.
Yeah, but and running the place. So welcome.
Thank you.
I've always I was in the city for a long time, so my job was to entertain. So I was out a couple nights a week, taking these bankers to the finest restaurants in London, you could say. And for me, a good restaurant is like a little bit of theater, and it's like, for me, it's like you're not only part of the theater, you're watching a show, and it's like a big deal to go to the right restaurant, and it's not just the food, it's not just the atmosphere, it's like a combination of things. And I was wondering if you could tell me, what is the magic that makes like a successful top restaurant?
Well, there's all sorts of things, really. I mean, from the minute you walk in the door, the way you're greeted, whether it's the doorman, the hat check girl, or the receptionist. I think that first impression of the restaurant is crucial. A cold reception could lead on to being a sort of evening of disaster. So I think that first impression, obviously, consistent food. I think some restaurants that serve kind of mediocre food but has fantastic service, it's easy to remember those places and have a good time. I think, some restaurants serve great food and the service is not so good. It's easily kind of forgettable. So I think you need a happy balance of all those different elements. I think having consistent food, interesting menu, interesting decor, is also crucial. You get a lot of restaurants and the rooms are quite boring. So I think, an interesting room, which is a bit like what we did at the Tramshed, it's an interesting building initially. And we added a few bits and pieces. And, that room, when it's buzzing, is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm going to just hold up a picture that was in Time Out magazine, but for our people on iTunes, can you kind of describe what that room is all about? I mean, there's a big cow and a bird in the middle of it, right? So what is going on there?
Well, during our meetings with the architects, who are literally just around the corner from you, for about a year and a half, we looked at this cardboard model of the Tramshed. And I went into the site meeting one day, and my architect, Andrew Waugh, around the corner, had moved the mezzanine to the middle of the room. And I said, no, I don't like that. It's not going to give the room the right look. So I thought maybe we need a sculpture or something. So I texted Damien Hirst and said, opening a new restaurant, chicken and steak. Have you got any ideas? So 24 hours later, he got his guys to mock up the tank with the cow in it. and there we go.
I guess that's
it was a work in progress.
I guess that's the beauty of being able to text Damien Hirst.
But it was, I was slightly worried about the having that thing in the middle of the room because, vegetarians, I kind of expected, the first few weeks, buckets of blood, red blood to be thrown against my windows, but it didn't happen. And, people were coming in and just, checking out the piece of work and then leaving the restaurant without even eating. So it became a bit of a sort of sightseeing exercise as well.
It's called Tram Shed. Why did you call it that, and what did that space used to be?
Well, it used to be a tram shed.
Okay.
It was a
Silly question.
Victorian. It was a Victorian tram shed, and that bit on the left with the steel supports that used to house the generators for the trams, and that was in late 1800s.
These are overground trams.
Yeah.
Okay.
And ironically, when we opened the restaurant, we couldn't get any electricity into the building. So we had a generator outside for about the first 5 or 6 weeks.
I think I remember that.
So you probably heard it from her.
Just a question slightly from left field, but I'm really interested to know from you, Mark, what is the aspect of being a restaurateur that you enjoy the least?
The least? Well, it'd be much easier if you didn't have to deal with staff and customers. One of those virtual restaurants would be great. But, I think the whole thing is, or can be a lot of fun. It can be a headache, it can be hard work, it is hard work. Mm-hmm. But the element I like is the fun side of it. When I was at college, well, in fact, when I was at school, I didn't know what to do in the 5th year. Didn't have any sort of career ideas in my head. In the last year at school, boys for the first time were allowed to do domestic science instead of another subject. So a few of us used to hate metalwork. Used to be filing away for weeks on end to get a really dodgy keyring or something. So 3 of us opted to do domestic science. So there was the teacher and 3 boys, and that was the whole class. Oh. And we just did it for a bit of fun, really.
So it was the most unmanly thing you could have done?
And then I still didn't know what to do, and I was working in a pub washing up at the weekends, and it got to the end of term, and I embarrassingly won the school prize for domestic science. So I had to get up in front of the whole school and go and collect I think it was a Delia Smith book or something. But still, I didn't know what to do, and there was a suggestion from the careers guy to go to catering college, which I thought, okay, well, I've got no other options. So I went to catering college and had a great lecturer called Laurie Mills, who, this was down in Dorset, and he'd always worked in London, was always talking about London. And, he was probably the person that kind of, curved my career, if you like. And he was a lot of fun. We used to go out and drink together, and we used to do this thing on a Thursday afternoon called electives, where you could choose another subject. So we used to go around to his flat with a few girls and a few litres of wine and party every Thursday. So I thought, this is fun, and I think from that period on, I moved to London, and I've always kind of, treated the business as a fun thing. And I think, if the staff are having fun, the customers are having fun. Sometimes we get it wrong, but we're human.
So you're not the guy that's yelling at the kitchen or yelling at the staff, because you get these images of these. I know you're not a celebrity chef per se, but you have that aspect of you. Are you not that guy?
I'm not that guy. No, I do have a little bit of a yell occasionally, but not on a consistent basis.
How can you run a business that way?
Well, I think you have to be firm and fair, and teaching your staff is crucial. We do an awful lot of training, and twice a week I meet the staff, the managers and the chefs, and we meet for a couple of hours and we talk about all different elements of the business. So I think communicating with the staff, so I've got 6 restaurants, one in the West Country. I've got a little fish restaurant, and I try and get down there about 3 times a month. And I think touching the staff and making sure that they're running your business for you as you would run it if you were completely hands-on is the important bit, and getting to know the customers. Hence why I'm sitting here.
It's I mean, I was reading your bio, and it's clear you've run a lot of restaurants during the last 20 years. Is there ever a point when you've opened a new venture and you, almost like a tipping point where you don't know if it's going to work or not? And if so, how do you identify that, and what actions do you take to tip it over?
Yeah, well, I mean, that question is perfect timing really, because a year ago we opened in Belgravia with Thompson Hotels, Thompson in New York.
How would you describe Bulgaria to people that don't know it, like people in New York or in California?
Well,
I'm actually trying to see how I describe it. I've been in London for 10 years. It's this
I know
weird...
quite a few people that live there. There's lots of wealthy people live in Bulgaria, but you don't see many front doors open. You see a lot of maids and nannies come up from the basements, but you don't see many front doors opening. And we kind of found at lunchtimes that was difficult for us business-wise. There's not a lot of people walking on the streets. People that own the houses are probably,
somewhere else.
At work in the city, or they're in the south of France or Moscow. So we didn't see an awful lot of business at lunchtimes, and I kind of knew it was a bit quiet, but I was quite confident that we could make it into a bit of a destination. But a year down the line, it hasn't worked for us, so that business failed. But I kind of look at it in a positive way, that it was money well lost, if you like. We were
because of the lessons
losing money. Yeah,
interesting.
Money well lost.
Because in a couple of years' time, we might get offered something else like that, and it just makes you think twice about the area, the position, the type of people that live there, what buildings you're surrounded with work-wise.
Do you notice, Brian, how the successful people that we interact with, a common element I notice amongst all of them is they're not afraid to fail.
Yeah.
They're really not. And it's the complete opposite, because in school you're taught, be a perfectionist, try to get everything right, and that's not how the world works, right?
Well, I think failing occasionally is good, because you do learn from it. And years ago, I opened a fish and chip shop in Maida Vale in West London with some friends.
Was that your first?
It was a kind of project on the side of what I was doing when I was doing Caprice, Ivy, Sheiky's, etc. And it failed because most fish and chip shops are a hands-on owner business, and I had a job, and someone was running it for us, and it was in a sort of edgy area. There's a lot of drug dealers outside, but people were coming from a distance, because we did lobster on the grill, lobster and chips to take away.
Wow.
Fish fingers, you could have healthy salsas and salads, but that business failed, and I lost £100,000 in a fish and chip shop. And my other two partners also lost the same amount of money. So that sort of taught me a lesson. I didn't have £100,000, but I sort of scrabbled together, paid my suppliers, because they're the worst people not to pay.
Okay.
Because they won't work with you again, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And you kind of lose faith. So it worked out. I've forgotten about it now, but it was a learning curve.
How much of it is practical experience? I mean, if people are out there listening to this and they want to start up a venture, I mean, you seem like the kind of guy that jumps in with both feet. Is that the kind of advice you give people?
Yeah, I think if you're confident, if you've got a good plan in your head to do it, then go for it. I think a lot of it is down to experience as well. Location. Although I've just, told you about the Belgravia story, location isn't always key or crucial. My restaurant in Smithfield is down a scuzzy little back street,
right.
But it's it's a good spot, and people come and have fun. Over the years, the Caprice was sort of at the end of a street behind the Ritz, and the same with the Ivy. Really, that was a little back street, and J Sheiky. So the location is not always important. Ploughing too much money into the restaurant is often a big mistake. I mean, our restaurant in Brewer Street, the previous owner had spent in excess of sort of £2.5 million.
I went to that restaurant before you took it over. It was a Japanese place.
Yeah, exactly.
I had lunch there a few times. Beautiful.
And he's the brother of a friend of mine, and he closed after 6 months. So we were able to pick up on someone else's failure, if you like, and we bought it for a couple 100,000. And we changed it from Japanese to British looking. But kept the big front door.
Can you see some of the things, operations like that? I mean, sometimes are they like a slow-moving car wreck where you can just see someone building something and you just don't see the business concept, or you think they're spending too much money? I mean, that was a beautiful restaurant and the service was good, but I would go in there and it was like really high-priced sushi on Brewer Street, which isn't the classiest venue, and it, I don't know, I guess it just never got.
Yeah, I mean, when we opened there, Ratnesh, my business partner, we walked into the building and Ratnesh wasn't quite sure about it, but I looked around and I went down in the basement and I immediately thought cocktail bar. And a lot of restaurateurs had walked in, and because it was Japanese, I think they didn't really think too much about it. And it's kind of the wrong end of Soho, it was at the time. But immediately I could see restaurant upstairs and cocktail bar downstairs, and I'd never done a bar before. So I got my friend Nick Strangeway to help me with the cocktail list, and it, all of a sudden became a very popular cocktail bar. And there was no other restaurants there. There was a building site outside. There was always roadworks outside the restaurant, so we could never open the windows or the door. So the first 6 months were interesting, and the other interesting thing now is there's right opposite, there's a new restaurant that's opening tonight called Mash, which is a Danish steakhouse. Chris Corbin and Jeremy King, my old bosses, are just around the corner. So that street there's quite a lot of restaurants that have opened in the last sort of year or two, which is a good thing. I think it's good for business to have other restaurants coming, sort of joining the area. In Smithfield Market, the only person that was there really was St John and Pascal Ossignac, who's across the other side of the market. And now there's lots of restaurants. My friend Russell, who owns Polpo, he's opened right opposite.
Sounds like you have
Burger and Lobster was opened.
Sounds like you have like an abundance mentality, because a lot of people would be, if they were operating a business and a competitor opened across the street, I mean, a lot of people have a scarcity mentality and they'd be like, oh no, this guy's going to run me out of business. But I really like the way he thinks. It's just like, cool, the more the better. There's enough for everyone. It's very cool.
Well, I think it just brings more people to the area. I mean, when I opened the Rivington first, I remember vividly James Goff, who owns Sterling Ackroyd, which he probably bought this building from.
What is Sterling Ackroyd? People that don't know.
They're estate agents.
Yeah, estate agents right around the corner.
And he came and he said, Mark, he said, I must shake your hand. This place has always been a failure, but I wish you all the best. And then about 6 months later, he shook my hand again. He said, congratulations, you've made it work eventually. So, and there's lots of restaurants around there now. I mean, I've just opened right opposite the Rivington.
Right, that's where Tramshed is.
Yeah.
But with Hix Soho, I remember it was known as like the place where all the celebrities were going, and it had such a buzz about it. I mean, is that things where you'll actually pick up a phone and call people, or if you're feeling that it was struggling, can you make that buzz happen, or is it just something that has to be organic?
When I do a restaurant, I often use friends of mine who are artists I always trade work with for food. So in Soho, for example, there wasn't much wall space, so I asked a bunch of artists if they'd make mobiles hanging from the ceiling. And I'd trade with them, and they come and eat for nothing and sign the bill. And in turn, they bring their friends in, their art dealers, gallery owners. So you kind of get an interesting kind of clientele in there.
That's quite smart.
Yeah, that is smart.
Good
It's
strategy.
devious.
Because you can go shopping for art and fill the walls with all sorts of things, but I think it needs an interesting story. So by me asking artists to make mobiles, some of them had never made a mobile in their life, and some of them aren't actually even mobile, they're just fixed to the ceiling. Some of them were getting a bit competitive, and some of them work really well. Some have motors. There's a Damien Hirst piece and a Sarah Lucas piece who operate on motors that are kind of spinning at different speeds at different times of the day. Mm-hmm. And one of the last people to install a mobile was Michael Craig Martin, who actually taught a lot of those artists at college. Mm-hmm. And then we just recently got a piece by Anthony Gormley. So, it's an interesting, because every so often there's a new piece hits the ceiling.
What's the craziest thing a customer or a chef or a member of staff has ever done in one of your restaurants?
Oh, there's a question. The craziest thing.
That you can talk about at least?
Yeah, I know, that's not what is the craziest thing? Sometimes customers do crazy thing. I mean, I remember years ago at the Caprice, an actor had ordered risotto with white truffles, and I saw him putting Tabasco all over it. It's like a £50 dish, and he's putting Tabasco on it.
Yeah.
Are you the kind of guy that would come out from the kitchen and be offended by that?
No, I just think it's interesting when people do that, or why they do it, because obviously their taste buds can't be that good, adding Tabasco to white truffles.
Yeah.
What do you think of the concept of a celebrity chef, and do you think that's something that's sustainable? Do you think that's a positive or a negative thing? I know you got a new cookbook coming out. We're going to talk about that later on baking, but
Yeah, I've always avoided the TV thing, really, to be honest.
I noticed I couldn't find much footage on you.
Yeah, there's
you
not
seem to
much.
be the reluctant cook on TV.
I am, but saying that, I'm doing Saturday Kitchen this week,
Okay.
but that's purely because of the book.
Okay.
So I always kind of say no to doing TV stuff because I want to sort of concentrate and be in the restaurants. Saying that, I did do the Great British Menu a few years ago,
Yeah.
and won a couple of courses, but that's kind of my TV career.
Do you just don't enjoy the spotlight, or?
No, I think it can consume an awful lot of time when I think you could be focusing on how the restaurant works and talking to the customers and training your staff. So it's not something that's appealed to me really.
I'm guessing for like the Gordon Ramsays of the world, I'm guessing that their restaurants are almost a small part of their business. And
Yeah,
it's their
yeah.
books and Gordon Ramsay's got so many damn television shows, and I'm guessing that their business becomes bigger. But you seem to be more of a restaurateur, as in.
Yeah, but and then on the other hand, you have someone like Jamie Oliver,
Right.
who has changed. I would say is part and parcel of changing the way that people eat and shop. I think what he's done for food on TV is incredible. It's
How has he changed the way people do that?
well, I think his TV shows make cooking at home look easy, where it's not a sort of studio and weighing ingredients and stuff. He's quite confident and I think enables the viewer to understand that you can just put a handful in and create a fantastic dish.
Are you talking Naked Chef, or are you talking since then? What did you?
Well, since then and then I suppose I think he's even managed to open very good Italian restaurants on the high streets that would feed students or grown-ups, and I think I think he's just confident. He talks well, and his knowledge is great. I like it when he does those sort of series abroad when he goes to a different country and
America.
cooks their local food. And Rick Stein, I think Rick Stein's another of my favourite TV chefs, and Hugh Furley-Whittingstall.
So you'll watch food and cooking programs on TV when you're at home?
I never watch TV. I very rarely turn it on. In fact, the last time I turned it on was a few days ago with the flooding in New York.
Okay. Why don't you watch TV?
I just don't. I don't know why. My girlfriend watches the X Factor. So I normally leave.
Sounds familiar.
I normally leave the room at that point and start cooking dinner or something.
You don't like Simon Cowell?
I just don't watch it. I just find it a bit, I don't know.
It's a complete waste of
Maybe it's a
fucking
girly
time,
thing.
bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick sold his television a few months ago, right? You completely got rid of it.
Yeah, man. Just I'm not interested anymore.
That's just-
There's never a point where I miss it.
Yeah, I'm the same.
No, that's fair. Mark, are you a workaholic? I look at all the things you have to do. I'm wondering if you're the guy that's up at 6 a.m. Are you the guy that's on his, mobile phone all the time, or not?
Yeah, my phone. I haven't really got an office as such. My mobile phone is my office. I get up early, 6ish. Go for a swim a couple of times a week. Quite often I write early because I do a column for the Independent and Esquire magazine. So it's quite a good time when the phone's not ringing and there's not many people around. So I normally either do it from home or head into the office.
But you don't have an office.
The tram shed is my
Oh,
office.
Hampstead's office. All right.
My library.
So you write as well.
Yeah, so I've done the Independent for 10 years on Saturdays,
So that's weekly column.
weekly, 4 recipes, a couple of thousand words.
How do you come up with that every week?
I think I think when you're writing, especially recipes, it's actually good for the chefs as well, because quite often the things that are in the magazine will appear on the menu that week or the following week. So I quite like the idea of publishing something that, you know, customers or my chefs can cook or eat on the restaurant menu.
It's interesting.
What are your favorite restaurants in London, and who do you think does it right, and who do you think does it wrong? I mean, do you walk into a restaurant sometimes and you're just like, this is not going to happen? They miss the customer service completely. Do you walk out of restaurants?
I've not ever walked out of a restaurant, actually. I don't think so, not from memory. But
Have you, Brian?
Oh yeah, I have.
Seriously?
I walk out if I don't have a good seat. If I don't have a good seat in a
Yeah,
restaurant,
but you're
I
the
leave.
pickiest dude in the
Maybe I
planet.
am. But no, I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, for me, it was always like, it's like a show to go out, you know, especially with an important client or a girlfriend or a friend, you know. I mean, we had lunch for your birthday last year, and it was important that we go to your competition. Sorry, I went to Hawksmoor. But, you know, it was important that we go there and we had a good seat, and, you know, I'm kind of weird like that. I don't know. But a lot of people demand that these days, right?
yeah, exactly. And I think they were restaurants for certain times, you know, like Chris and Jeremy, who own the Wolseley and
Yeah.
Delaunay. You know, that's such a great room. It's got a good buzz. A lot of people do business at breakfast time now.
Yeah, Wolseley's big for breakfast.
Yeah.
Power breakfast.
So, you know, I've got high regard for them. Lecanda Locatelli is great. Richard Corrigan's. My friend Huey has some Vietnamese restaurants around the corner, which I'm
It's
sure you've
Catre
been
and
to.
stuff. Yeah, I saw your review on
It's
them.
a really cool restaurant.
Yeah.
I like that.
And he's open next door to the Groucho Club in Soho, which is quite handy.
Oh, yeah. So you eat Vietnamese a lot?
Yeah, quite a bit. I quite like going to sort of scruffy places. When I used to live up the road, I used to go to the Mangal Okabashi, which is a Turkish restaurant with no menu. It's basically just a cabinet with different kebabs in there and sweetbreads and lamb chops and stuff. So I quite like those sort of places. Japanese, I like finding new Japanese restaurants. I used to go to Nobu years ago. My friend was cooking there. Nobu's still good, I think, Zuma. But I also like finding those little backstreet, little old-fashioned Japanese restaurants. There's one in Marylebone called Dinings, which is very good.
Yeah, that gets good reviews. Very small, isn't it?
Yeah, tiny, yeah. You need to get in there quick. But actually, there's one which I want to try next to the Chop House, which is even smaller, apparently. It's got about 20 seats.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have clashes with chefs? Because it's my understanding that a chef is generally someone who has quite a strong ego, and he has to be because he's in command of his kitchen during extremely chaotic and rush type periods. And I mean, do any of them ever just throw their toys out the cart and just walk out? Or
Lots of them do. I mean, not. It's happened with my chefs a few times, but there are some, not mentioning any names, there's some fierce-tempered chefs out there.
Do you just put up with them?
Yeah. I mean, I don't socialise with the fair-tempered ones, but I think, yeah, the problem with that is it kind of gives us a bit of a bad reputation, you know. I think, you know, the general public think that, you know, they often think that that's the way all chefs are. It's like when Anthony Bourdain did Kitchen
Yeah, I was
Confidential.
gonna ask you that next.
People used to say to me, so is your kitchen like that? You know, it's like,
That book blew my mind.
I mean, he's a great writer, so I love that book.
Yeah.
I encourage anyone to pick up a copy. But, I mean, is that just New York, or do you think he sensationalized it? Or is London like that? Is there cocaine everywhere in the kitchen?
well, it is. I mean, cooking's a big thing now. It's like a bit rock and roll, really. You
Yeah,
know, when
Like
I
cooking or cocaine?
when I left college and come to London, which was, you know, almost 30 years ago, cooking wasn't actually a respected
Right.
profession as such. But now, you know, it's, you know, it is a bit rock and roll, and people know you, and people point you out in the street. Even I'm not even a celeb, and taxi drivers recognise you, and they
Seriously.
yeah. So it's quite interesting that it is. But I suppose, you know, restaurants are places where people go to eat, like going to the theatre. So, you know, why wouldn't, you know, a genuine foodie know what, you know, you look like, or the food you serve, and, you know, will know a lot about you.
You mentioned before we started the show that you'd prefer to have, in one of your flagship restaurants, you said you get these big tables of bankers who are arriving after a late night out, and you said you'd much prefer to have rather like a hen party or something. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Well, the funny thing is, when we first opened the tram shed, we had a bit of a problem with a local residents committee, and we had to sort of swear that there'd be no hen parties and that sort of thing. But we don't generally take big parties in the restaurant. But if I had the choice of a table of 10, bankers showing off and being a bit loud, I think I prefer the party of
The hens?
party. Yeah, the hens.
They're actually quieter than the bankers?
So the bankers are that obnoxious?
Can be.
In groups,
In
right?
groups, yeah, in groups especially. I mean, when I first opened the chop house, we did have that a couple of times where, they sort of pissed off,
What
tables
can you
next
do?
to
I
them.
mean, how much can you control that environment?
Well, you can't.
Okay.
Really, it's kind of out of your hands. You can't start vetting people on the phone when they're booking a table.
Do you like to be there at your restaurants at nighttime? Do you like to be watching the floor, or do you
Yeah.
like to watch the kitchen? Or?
Yeah, I'm normally in at least 2 of my restaurants every day, whether I'm eating or observing or chatting to people. So, yeah, I think it's important. You have to keep an eye on the business, and that's why I've kind of stayed away from the TV thing, because you can't run a business from a TV studio.
Interesting.
Well, some people can. Rick Stein does it very, very well. Really. He's probably the only restaurant chef I think does the 2 things.
It's
well
just not your style, though, I guess.
I always hear about like those Bourdain stories, and I'm always wondering, can you really run a business in the long term when there's all that mayhem going on and all the coke going on? I mean, because no other business could function that in the long term. But how can a kitchen? I always wonder.
Yeah, it's the kitchen is probably one of the toughest places you can work.
Really,
I always when someone tells me they want to be a chef, I can't think of anything
the
worse.
heat I couldn't handle, and then the burns that like Bourdain would talk about. Is it really that bad, or the pressure?
It is, yeah. I mean, years ago I used to have sort of scars up my arm from opening the oven and putting things in under pressure, and it's it's hot in there. It's hot, it's noisy, it's busy. You're under pressure. So an amalgamation of all those things together is it's could be a recipe for disaster, but I think you have to approach it in a slightly different way. That's why I quite like it to be fun and not too serious all the time. Have a bit of fun with the menu, have a bit of fun with the decor.
It's just, I think it's with any project. It's like Brian and I were just talking about yesterday. Is when we're having fun, our work is better.
10 times better.
10 times better.
Yeah.
And when we're not, and when it becomes too serious and too heavy, it suffers. And I guess it's because ultimately we are playful creatures. We come here to have a good time. Well, that's what I believe anyway.
I think you can manage that and play and have a good work ethic too. I guess you just have to kind of watch yourself. I read about the place in Belgravia that you're going to be shutting down. Is it you actually didn't choose that space? I think that space was already built, and then you talked about a place like the Tram Shed where I think you built a restaurant around the space.
Yeah.
And how important is that? Maybe for someone that's thinking about opening a restaurant, but how important is it to custom tailor it? And also, customers aren't stupid, are they? Like you talk about the artwork in Hix Soho. I mean, people notice these things, right?
Yeah. I think the building and the look is important. If there's a story behind the building, like the Tram Shed, then great. You can tell the story about hence the name of the restaurant as well. Because coming up with a name for a restaurant is quite tricky. I mean, before we opened the Chop House, Ratnesh, my business partner, and myself, he said, I think we should call it Hix. And I said, no, I don't want my name above the door,
Would that have been your first self-named restaurant at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, he managed to persuade me, and my staff persuaded me to call it Hix. And actually, it's quite a good logo, just 3 letters and all straight lines.
Yeah.
So it's quite a good, sort of natural branding. So naming a restaurant is actually difficult, because you either end up with the name of the street or a previous building, like the Wolseley was a Wolseley car garage. I think if you can capture that, that's great. But quite often restaurants end up becoming the name of the street or the number of the street or whatever. So it's
which
a
is
tricky
boring.
one. Can be. Or we end up calling the restaurant something that, doesn't particularly mean anything,
I mean, tram shed's over the top. It almost is like kind of cool in how rough it is.
Yeah,
And then you serve the chickens with their feet in the air, and at the restaurant. I mean, it's quite kind of a brash take on things, isn't it?
That's intense.
Because I think, things like that they stand out, if you're sitting at a table like this and you see the chicken going past you. I'll have two of those. And that's a bit of theatre for me. That is the theatre element of, the customers get stuck in, they carve the chickens up themselves. And I think that's what makes it fun.
That's cool. Mark, what would you do if you weren't a restaurant, or like, let's say for whatever reason, there's a huge market decline or downturn and you couldn't be a restaurateur anymore? What would be the first thing that jumps to mind?
That's a very good question.
Thanks.
I don't know, actually. I mean, I'm not really. I haven't got any other skills as such. When I was at school, there was a little group of us that were very keen golfers. All my friends ended up becoming golf pros, and I went to catering college. But I'm sort of glad I never went down that route. I mean, they all did, pretty well. But I don't know what I'd do, really, if I was... maybe I'd become an art dealer or something. I don't know.
Probably. It's funny because I would expect a restaurateur to be kind of, I mean, you probably would too, to be kind of like this slick guy.
Yeah.
Right? And to be kind of, but that's not you. Do people say that to you a lot?
Yeah, I normally when I get up in the morning, I think, okay, is today a suit day or is it a jeans and a t-shirt day? And that's the. If I've got a bit of a hangover, then it's normally a suit and make sure I'm looking good. But I'm not smart or slick, I don't think.
How do you get up at 6 a.m. if your job is to be in these restaurants till late and to be kind of in the bars? And I mean, Mark's bar is probably open until 2 a.m. or something, right?
Yeah, it is difficult. Getting up an hour after you've gone to bed. Yeah,
Yeah, it must be.
Sounds like the city.
Well, sometimes you miss getting up because
Wow.
It's even worse.
But I've calmed down a bit now. We just had a baby, and I've moved to West London, so I've defected from the East End.
Oh, you were at East End before. And how are you finding that?
I like it, actually. I sort of know equally as many people in the West as I do in the East, so it's quite a good balance. And I've got my scooter, so it's easy to get around town on the scooter.
Dangerous scooter. I've got like a very London real question, but what do you think if you could make a phone call to 25-year-old Mark Hix? What kind of advice would you give him?
To a 25-year-old?
Yeah, to yourself at 25.
Oh, I see. Well, I was motivated. I was trying to remember. I was motivated and kind of got on with it without maybe too much ambition at that point. I sort of did things quite early, so I would always recommend that it's hard work and quite often a bit of luck is involved. I remember in my career I kind of had a few strokes of luck. Getting the job at the Caprice was literally, I was working in a restaurant in the city, and my fishmonger phoned me up and said, Hixie, the Caprice job was coming up, and I'd never even heard of the Caprice. And I went in, and Chris and Jeremy, the owners, then grilled me about 4 or 5 times. They come into the restaurant, and then just by chance one night I was having dinner at Alistair Little's when he had a restaurant in Soho, and I was chatting to Alistair, and he would once you got him on the subject of food, it was difficult to stop listening, because he was a mine of information. And Chris Corbin come into the restaurant and sort of caught me talking to Alistair, and that was probably one of the high regarded restaurants at the time, Alistair Little, because his food was very kind of simple but cutting edge. I remember seeing a tomato and mozzarella salad, and I didn't realise that many different types of tomatoes existed, and this was 22 years ago. Now it's the normal to get 5 different types of tomato on your plate. So that for me, that was a stroke of luck. And when I joined them, I was given a membership at the Groucho Club, and I met a lot of people at the Groucho Club.
So it was a lot of networking.
A lot of networking, not
Not intentional networking.
Not intentional, no. Just over a glass of wine or.
They say the
or
best
in the
thing to
granny.
do with these networking things, because a lot of people go to these networking events and they try to give their card out to 25 people. But I've heard the best advice is just to have a good conversation with somebody.
Yeah, yeah. And the Groucho Club's always been full of interesting people. So yeah, I would. So my advice is, hang out with the right people. That's probably important. Work hard and be ambitious, but not over ambitious. Just step carefully, I would say.
You have a business partner. I think I saw him on one of the YouTube videos, and he seems kind of like your CFO, kind of the voice of reason sometimes.
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
your creativity. How does that work?
Well, we worked together. He was the finance director at Caprice Holdings, and he left before me, and he went on to have his own little business with looking after accounts for different restaurants. And he kind of urged me to leave and set up with him. So the first restaurant was the Chop House, and we both bunged a bit of money and borrowed some money from the bank. And we've kind of done that all the way along, really. We've kind of just borrowed a bit of money from the bank. We haven't got any backers.
Okay. Can you get loans these days from the bank?
Well,
for restaurants?
That's tricky. I mean, when in the tram shed, I just sold my house, and I had to put all the proceeds of my house in a bank account with Lloyd's in order to borrow 700,000 to do the tram shed.
Wow.
So,
It's crazy. I mean, you're taking risks on a monthly basis, aren't you?
yeah, but a lot of people have big backers who have big stakes in the business, and you almost become an employee then. So, so we've kind of just done it and scratched around and borrowed a bit of money from here and there and reinvested money that we've made in the business in the next restaurant.
It's a high stakes game.
It really
Being
is,
a
right?
restaurateur, yeah, big time.
And lots of people fail. Lots of people think that they want to open a restaurant who've never owned a restaurant in their lives.
It's glamorous, right?
And
It's
People
like-
speaks
it's like-
about it in the book.
And
People-
those,
oh, yeah.
and those are the biggest failures often, the people that think they can become restaurateurs, because they throw a lot of money at it. What they don't realise is your bottom line is more often than not only about 10% profit, and if you're making less profit than that, then there's not much return at all. So all the time you've got to make sure that your turnover's high, your costs are good, and your profit is in good stead.
When you see one of your restaurants like slowing down or something, I mean, do you panic sometimes? Is there a way that you can try to drum business up? I mean,
It is scary because
You look like a guy who never panics.
Yeah, I
though.
know.
The most relaxed person
Yeah.
you've ever had on.
I put my whole house and my whole net worth on the line.
But it's I mean, when things slow down, it is worrying. You have to look at yourself and think, okay, what are we doing?
Do you ever say,
are
I
we
was
doing it
wrong? Do you ever look at it and say, wow, I got this one wrong, I have to eject like that?
Yeah. I mean, the Belgravia one was a good case in point. But I think, keeping an eye on your business and always evolving it is crucial. I think, the minute you take your eye off the ball is the time when things do start slipping. And that's the good thing with having Ratnesh as the business partner. He is the numbers, really. So on a daily basis, I know which every single restaurant is turning over.
Okay.
And who's been in and everything. So
Who's been in as far as important
customers,
people?
yeah. Well, not regulars or important people or
Okay.
less important people.
Okay.
But we, so we don't have a managing director, we don't have a CEO. We kind of both do that ourselves. So some days I'm the CEO, some days I mop the floor. Sometimes,
Oh, that's crazy.
That must be a key to your success, is just keeping your ear to the ground.
yeah. And I think you have to be seen to be mucking in. Not that I muck in the kitchen these days, but I kind of just get on with other stuff. And,
Yeah. Let's talk about your cooking. Let's talk about this book. Why now for this book, and why baking? Because you talked about baking. I know the first thing people think baking, as you said in the foreword, is I can't bake. I mean, I can get in the kitchen and cook, but if I want to bake something, I get scared.
Well, when you do cookbooks, I've done about 8 cookbooks now, and your publisher summons you for another meeting, and they say, Mark, what about a baking book? And you think, I'm I'm not so good on cakes. I'm not, I don't get home every night and start baking. And then this idea came into my head that, baking isn't about cakes and pastries and things. Baking is something that started in an oven, whether it was a cobbler or, someone making horses, horses for shoes. And so heat, bread was made in the centre of the village in, or a hole in the ground, maybe, So ovens 2, 3, 4, 1,000 years ago, that was baking. Obviously it's moved on now, and what's in the book is, all sorts of different things. There's veal baked in hay.
Oh wow!
Which is a good method if you've got an arga which isn't working very well, and the hay keeps the heat in.
What's an arga?
An arga is one of those old ovens that heats the house as well.
Okay.
If you go to your friends' country houses, they normally have an arga there that doesn't work very well, and the heat's not really that hot.
I saw that recipe and I was like, where do I get hay? But is it easy? You said it was not hard to find, right?
You go to the pet shop.
That's
Can I have some?
cook.
Can I have a bag of hay for my veal, please?
Clean hay?
No, if it's a bit mucky, it's better flavour.
Okay.
But you have to soak it in water.
Wow.
And there's some baked vegetables in there. There's salmon baked on a sort of Scandinavian or Russian salmon dish that's baked on a plank of wood, spread with mustard and dill. You soak the wood in water and you put the salmon fillet on the wood in the oven, so the salmon imparts a bit of flavour from the actual wood itself.
Wow, that sounds cool.
And there's a dish in there from Mark Edwards, my friend, he's a chef at Nobu, and when they opened Nobu in Berkeley Square, he had a wood-fired oven just installed, so he was messing around with different dishes, and he brought me out a half cabbage, which was baked in the wood oven, and it was covered with shaved black truffles. So that's baking.
Okay.
Yeah, when I think of baking, I think of cupcakes.
Right,
it's just so far removed from that.
But there are some pastries and stuff in there, and cakes, and
A lot of vegetables in there.
a lot of vegetables. There's pies, all sorts of
Very
different
English.
stuff.
It's interesting how this, like you said, Mark has this like abundance mentality where he's dropping all these competitor restaurants, but you seem to just be thinking as British cuisine just rises, everyone rises.
Yeah, I think the food available now, compared to 20 years ago, and the British food, it's moved on so much. 20 years ago, when I first moved to London, all the best ingredients come from France. Now our farmers are making great chickens, ducks. We've always had good beef, but also our farmers are growing amazing vegetables and fruits which weren't available. They would have been imported in the past. Mm-hmm. So now, we've got everything on our doorstep. You don't need to go too far afield.
It's interesting how England's become such a gastronomy hub, whereas it used to be known as the place with the shittiest food in the world.
Why does British food traditionally get such a bad rap?
Well, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the food wasn't that good. The average high street restaurant would have been serving trash. But these days you've got a good chance of going to a restaurant off the street that you've never heard of, and you get half decent food, or very good food. But I think in France, it's actually gone the other way a bit. I don't think the food generally in France, it was. You'd always say it. You could stop on the roadside, and you could always rely on getting a good meal, lunch or dinner. And that's
changed, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's changed. And also, I think the other thing with France is that they don't let other nationalities of cuisine in.
Right.
So in France, say Paris, you don't get the best Chinese, Japanese, Italian, Turkish, Greek, Whereas in London, within 15 minutes of here, you've got all sorts of different types of food. Which I think that's what's great about London, is that any time of the day you can just go and eat, whatever you fancy. And I think that's why we're actually much better now, because there's so many different influences from different countries. If we walk 10 minutes that way, we go to an Indian supermarket. you know, you can get whatever you want.
It's like a Bangladeshi supermarket on Brick Lane.
Yeah,
You can
exactly.
Get these fish that look like aliens.
Yeah.
But I have Indian friends in New York that say the best Indian food is in London, not even in India. And I always tell people they got to come to London to try the food because it's some of the best food around because you get so many choices. You know, I go to Paris, I agree, it's hard. You get French food and then French food with 2 stars and French food with 3 stars. But
And if you're vegetarian in France, it's no good at all.
they don't understand that concept.
No.
It's hysterical.
Is vegetarian something you have to think about in all of your menus these days?
Yeah, each of the restaurants have a vegetarian menu, including Tramshed.
They just have chicken feet flying around you. So is that, and what percentage of customers actually, I always think people say they're vegetarians, but I always wonder if they actually practice it. So
I know, a lot of vegetarians eat chicken and fish, don't they?
Yeah, it's so sad.
Is it like 10%, 20%, you reckon?
Yeah, quite a high percentage,
High, yeah.
especially in London. But I find in the West Country, in my restaurant there, you hardly ever come across any vegetarians.
Wow.
So, and
To what do you attribute that, Mark?
well, I think in the countryside, you know, you're kind of brought up with meat and fish.
Old school stuff.
Yeah.
What about
So
raw
it's
food?
fine.
Do you think you'll be opening Hix Raw anytime soon?
That's a good question.
Well, you know, my first restaurant in Soho, you know, was actually about oysters and chops. So, you know, we have 5 or 6 different types of oysters. We do quite often do raw dishes. It might be just a, you know, a kind of ceviche type of dish.
Okay.
But raw is quite interesting because you could, you know, go for days and days without actually having to cook anything as such. So it's, you know, it's quite.
Is that a dream?
What's your take on organic ingredients and ethically sourced meats and poultry?
Yeah,
Good
I mean,
question.
organic. We don't do organic. You'll find that a lot of farmers that farm well aren't organic. Everything that we source is fish, especially sustainable. Sadly, a lot of people still aren't understanding the sustainability side. You know, it's crucial that we spread out the different types of fish that we're eating, and
To give stocks a chance to replenish.
yeah, exactly. And you know, that's what's happened with the bluefin tuna. You know, I don't know if you've seen that film, The End of the Line, which is
No.
it focuses on the Japanese market, and it's a very good documentary. A friend of mine was one of the producers, and you know, I think that's a good example of, you know, a species that, you know, we all like to eat bluefin tuna, but we're not allowed to eat bluefin tuna. But I think sourcing well, you know, you don't ever see the word organic on my menus. I think organic, the word organic is slightly misunderstood or misread. Organic farming is quite expensive for the farmer, and you know, it's not always about taste. You know, organic things don't always taste better than something that's been well reared and well fed. So, for example, the chickens that we have over there, you know, they're not organic. They're kind of semi-free range, because if you filled this room with chickens and left the windows open, they'd stay indoors. You know, they wouldn't go out. And I've been to lots of chicken farms which are free range, and you know,
The chickens fucking hate it.
Yeah, and all the doors are open, and hardly any of the chickens ever go outside. You know, so but they're free range because they're allowed to do whatever they want. So a lot of it is down to, you know, them being able to roam free and what they're actually fed on. So yeah, so organic doesn't exist with us. I occasionally, by mistake, pick up a pint of organic milk in the supermarket.
So you just don't even engage with that concept? You think it's overdone? Do you think people just associate it with the wrong things?
I think if you're sourcing your ingredients well, then you don't have to go down the organic route. I remember when I was doing my book, British Regional Food, I went up in the north of England and visited one of my producers who does, you know, various types of beetroots and big shallots and sprouting broccoli. And there was a motorway right next to his farm. And I asked him the question, what you just asked me about organic. And he said, you see that farm on the other side of the motorway? That's an organic certified farm. And it's that far from the motorway.
Wow.
So, But there are things like freedom food. Now, freedom food is interesting. Our salmon that I smoke on the roof of Selfridges, it took me a long time to find the right salmon, and freedom food applies to all sorts of things. But it is what it says, freedom food. They are well fed, well reared. And for me, freedom food is kind of a couple notches up from organic. Yeah.
No, I didn't know
Is
that.
this a pop-up restaurant, or do you just usually go to the roof of Selfridges to smoke?
Well, I started smoking. You can get it on YouTube actually.
He has a smoker in his house, a salmon smoker in his
Okay.
backyard.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And I used to get home at night and have to go to the bottom of the garden and carry all the salmon and put it in the fridge for the restaurants for the next day. And then production started getting a bit high. We opened our restaurant in Selfridges. And then the food hall, we started selling it in the food hall in Selfridges.
And you were smoking all that at home,
I was at the time, and
taking your work
then
home
I
with you.
asked the guys at Selfridges if I could have a space up on the roof. And they built me a little shed.
That's amazing.
And I put my smoker in. So
Mind blowing.
Some would call that an obsession, Mark.
So that's the. So I actually don't do the smoking anymore. I've delegated that to my team at Selfridges. But that was one of the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to do when I opened the chop house. I wanted to do something that was interesting and unique. And I thought, smoking salmon, because there's a lot of ropey smoked salmon around. There's that stuff you buy in the supermarkets that's been sliced in a packet for ages. Doesn't really always taste of what it should be tasting of. So I thought, go back to a real old-fashioned, traditional smoked salmon and cut it Scandinavian style, slightly thicker, so that you can taste the fish and you can taste the smokiness on the outside.
Yeah, I saw you doing that in that video, and we always associated smoked salmon with like the super thinly sliced. I've never had it that way.
Well, I was always taught to slice it as thin as possible so that you can see the plate through it almost. That was the way I was taught to carve salmon. But
You're changing your mind now.
yeah.
We've only got a few minutes left, but I was wondering, what's in your future, Mark? I mean, are we gonna? I would love to see an ethnic Hix restaurant, because you kind of have the ode to British cuisine to a certain extent. But
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, when I opened Belgravia, actually, or Selfridges maybe, I went off-piste a bit because, my philosophy, and I suppose I've got a bit of a reputation for British produce.
Yeah.
But the crowd at Selfridges, is obviously very, very different. There's a whole mixture of people that go in there shopping. So the menu there is a bit of an international menu. So you can go and have a risotto or bowl of pasta or a ceviche. So the menu there is a bit different. And when I cook at home, when I'm down in the West Country or do a dinner party at home, more often than not, I tend to cook Asian dishes. Like especially if I've just been out in Dorset and caught a couple of lobsters. I'll turn them into something a bit Asian, because I'm used to eating and serving, British food, quite simple. So that sort of little bit of kick, with a bit of Asian fragrance and spice, is often well received at a dinner party at home.
okay, but will we be seeing that in a future restaurant of yours?
Maybe.
Okay.
You never know.
And are you good for now with your portfolio, or are you always looking for the next thing?
At the moment, we want to just do some more chicken and steak restaurants.
Okay.
Because I think, the way restaurants are going now, there's quite a few restaurants around that just do one or two things. And it sort of makes you think, what have I been doing for years, having menus with 10 starters and 10 main courses. And you suddenly open something with, almost no choice.
I kind of like it.
It is, because you know what you're going to get.
We're going to go there, Nick, one of these days. We'll go down the road.
Yeah, let's do it.
See Mark for lunch. So if they want to get your book, I saw it on Amazon. Is that the best place to get it?
Well, the sad thing is these days that, a lot of those little independent bookshops are sort of a bit hard done by because of Amazon.
Okay.
But go to an independent bookshop if
Okay.
you can. Otherwise, if you're a bit lazy, go to Amazon.
Okay, and that's Mark Hix on baking. Are you a Twitterer, Mark? I'm guessing you're not.
Well, do you know what? We tweet and we blog, but really from a sort of marketing point of view. So my staff tweet and blog. Because it's interesting, that whole PR marketing thing these days in restaurants is just changed completely. You can get a message out to the world these days by tweeting. And in the old days, you'd have to hire a PR company or a marketing specialist to find out what the best way to market your restaurant and tell the world about yourself. But these days, you know, you can do it instantly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think, you know, there are also people which I'm sort of discovering more and more, you know, the way your website is built and the way things appear to get you higher up the Google list. You know, it's quite interesting in a restaurant.
Yeah, we should have a talk about that later. SEO. But your website for Tramshed is chickenandsteak.com?
Yeah.
Okay, and the rest?
Or just go on to Hix, yeah.
Hix.com.
.co.uk.
.co.uk. Okay, fantastic. Mark, thank you so much. That was very enlightening. It's
nice chatting to you.
Yeah, it's good to see what goes on behind the man, you know. So that's good. And I'll put all your contact information up so people can find you.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Until then.
It's about the journey.
All right, thanks, guys.
Welcome to London.
Urban environment is not. Yeah, because all the time I feel the world is our playground. And it's not because people like to say that it's urban. It's not urban. It can be in a jungle. It can be, you know, like Tarzan. You know, Tarzan is a guy who does parkour.